Hello, everyone. Matt Jones here with TRC. I'm the technical manager for the PG&E Multifamily Upgrade Program, and I welcome everyone here to our Q1 Partner Forum. Do a little housekeeping here. So first, we're using GoToWebinar. I want to make this as interactive as possible. So a lot of times we ask you to type in questions, and you can do that, and we'll get to them. But you can also raise your hand if you want to speak, and we're going to have a number of opportunities to ask questions and provide feedback. Here's what our agenda is going to look like. And again, we'll have at each of these little sections, and we'll take a pause and answer any questions that come up or any comments that people would like to make. And I encourage everyone to pitch in and participate. So we'll do a few program updates. We'll talk about some of the new incentives and bonuses that we have this year. We'll talk about the incremental pathway, which is back. And I think if you were on the orientation that we had last year, you know that we are no longer aiming to have strict program year deadlines. We still have deadlines in the program, but we're able to enroll some projects for the next program year. But we're specifying and providing some information on how you can do that with this incremental path. And we'll talk about this non-residential transition update. So this is for the folks that are doing energy models out there. We've got some updates on that. And we'll talk briefly about some of the PG&E owner services that TRC is facilitating. So updates. So far this year, we've got 15 properties that have applied or are in the assessment review process. That translates to about 1,600 units. And based on last year's average incentive that we ended up paying out, given this level of interest, that means we still have 75% of our program year incentives still out there, still available for you to claim with your projects. So plenty of opportunity out there, and we'd love to hear about anything you're working on. Okie dokie. So let's jump right into some of these policy items. So one of the things we're doing this year is you have the opportunity to receive part of the assessment incentive early. And this is a limited time offer. The idea here is that we want to get customers to apply now and apply right away. And we've also gotten feedback from you all, the raters and the contractors in the program, but especially the raters, that it's easier to sell a job if you can defer some of those upfront costs. So that's why we're doing it. But it's limited time because we want to get the pipeline filled up. We want projects in the program so they can get work underway. And so 2 stipulations: you have to apply, your project has to apply before March 31st. And then you need to complete the assessment review process within 90 days of submitting an application. And that assessment review process means you go out there onto the site, you do the assessment, you create the test-in package, you submit it to TRC, you go through the review process with TRC and reserve your incentives. So if you do that in 90 days, you apply before March 31st, we will pay some of the assessment incentive early. And what do you get? It's 25% of the total assessment incentive. So essentially, on a project that gets $100 per unit in assessment incentives, we're paying out $25 per unit when we reserve incentives for the project. So when you get that notice to proceed, that PG&E has set aside money for your project, we will send a check for $25 a unit. And so here, we'll take a pause. This summarizes what we just talked about. Any questions or feedback on how that's going to work? And Siobhan, if you're seeing anything, let me know.
So far, nothing has come through.
All right, so that's easy. So next change and policy update or incentive that we have this year is the on-time completion bonus. And here we're just trying to incentivize projects that can maintain their construction timeline. And you get $50 per unit for on-time or early completion. And we're setting this up to get paid to the contractor, and that'll be the default unless otherwise specified. So unless the project has a desire, has some other wants to do it some other way, but the default is we'll pay it to the contractor, and it's based on meeting the completion timeline. So before we reserve incentives on a project, we'll have a meeting that includes the contractor, the rater, and the project ownership team or the property management team. And we'll talk about what the construction timeline is, what the scope is. We'll take a look at past MUP projects to figure out how long those took, and together we'll come up with a reasonable deadline for completing the project. And completion in this case means both construction's done and the test out package, so verification package is submitted by the rater. So we'll set that timeline, and if you meet that timeline, you get $50 a unit. And if you miss the timeline, you just forego the opportunity for that extra incentive. In a little bit, we'll talk about incremental projects, and if you have an incremental project, we'll have deadlines for each stage, and we'll just split that incentive in half. So it'll be $25 per unit at stage 1 and $25 per unit at stage 2. So again, opportunity for questions or feedback on how this is going to work. So if you have any feedback, if you think this is going to help keep your projects on track and is going to be a good motivator for either the owner or the contractor, let me know. And I'll also throw out there, if you want to hold your questions to the end, feel free, and we can catch up later.
Actually, we have a hand raised, Matt.
Okay.
Linda, you should be unmuted.
Great, thanks, Siobhan. Matt, I just have a question about the definition of contractor. So does that mean it's the general contractor that would get that incentive?
Right, so it would be the contractor that's listed on the application.
Oh, okay, got it.
So I guess there could be some projects where you have multiple trades doing work there, and we can talk about that if we have a project that is going for that incentive, how we might split that up.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
I think that's it for now, Matt.
Thanks. So the incremental path. Like I said, we're aiming to, if we have a project that has opportunity either this year or next year, we want to work with that project. And this pathway is for projects that are starting work this year, completing some of that work in 2018, but finishing the remainder of the work next year in the 2019 program year. And it's important to note here that for our program to be successful, we need to have energy savings every year. It helps us continue on the program, show that we're making progress. So that's why we need to get some work done in this program year. And so what we're stipulating for these incremental projects is that we would like to get 50%, if you're going to apply for this incremental pathway, we'd like to get 50% of the work completed in 2018 and 50% completed in the 2019 program year. So we'll split up, make up to 2 stages based on the program year that work is completing. I also want to let everyone know that during this process, while we're hashing things out, usually we're trying to do a lot of work before we reserve incentives on the project. And at incentive reservation, we'll work with you and the entire project team to determine what the verification documents are going to be required at each stage. And that'll depend on the scope of work and the project schedule. But all the raters out there, you should be prepared to conduct a verification site visit at each stage. So that's expected, and if you're looking at this pathway, you should build that into your budgeting process. And what is 50% of the work? We're flexible on that. So we essentially, like I said, we want to make sure that we're getting project energy savings each year, and we can work with your team to define what 50% means for a given project. So it could be 50% of energy savings. It could be, based on the work scope, where some measures are completing in stage 1, some measures are completing in stage 2. It could be based on how many buildings are completing in each stage. We can work with you on that. And if you do have a 2019 project that is, not doing any work in 2018 or not really completing anything in 2018, we still are interested in these projects. And as long as we have resources, we can aim to enroll these projects. And the reason you'd want to consider that option, if you have a project that's kind of, a ways out at this point, you'd be able to get the assessment review done, so get that out of the way. And, we would ask PG&E to reserve incentives based on our current incentive level. So again, as we have resources, we can potentially enroll 2019 projects. And once the 2019 program year is announced, we'll have a formal structure for what happens, for projects that are applying in the program year, in the 2019 program year. So any questions or comments on the incremental path, Siobhan?
No, nothing has come in. We announced the water performance incentive this year, and this is a pretty exciting incentive where we can now take credit for cold water savings. And the reason we can do that is because there's embedded energy that occurs from the transportation and treatment of water. And all that, these energy savings that we're going to claim, they all occur off-site. So they're not site energy savings. They don't contribute to that 10% savings threshold.
these are happening, more towards the plant because it's the savings that you get from not having to run treatment plants and push water over hills and things like that with pumps. So what we expect is we still want to know baseline conditions. So if you're looking at toilets, say, we want to know what the gallons per flush of the existing toilet is, or if you're looking at turf replacement, we want to know, okay, what's there now and how many square feet. So when you're doing your assessment, if your property is considering taking water savings measures, document what's there and figure out what you're planning to do. And since these aren't site savings, we're reporting these separately. So we'll do all the background calculations and the estimates. We'll work with you to figure out, okay, what's a reasonable baseline. And essentially what I'm saying is that I want you to tell TRC what you're planning to do at the site, and we will help you take credit for it. We do have some basic guidelines, and we're developing the remaining guidelines. So what the maximum gallon per flush would be, or the minimum gallon per flush would be for baseline, and what you need to install, things like that. But in the meanwhile, these are kind of the overall things you need to know. So if you choose 3 of these individual measures, and you're eligible for the bonus. So shower heads, aerators, toilets, turf replacement, controls for irrigation, rain barrels. So those are all measures that we have a quantifiable savings value for. And in this case, so as an example here for shower heads, if you want to take credit for this measure, you need to replace at least 75% of the shower heads at the property. And I want to also kind of go over, because this can be confusing, about how this incentive actually works. So I mentioned that these embodied energy savings, they're not site energy savings, they happen off the site. So we aren't adding any energy savings to an individual project. That's all reported separately and tracked separately. So you don't have to worry about adjusting your calculations. All you need to know is that if your site savings are at 16% in this example, you would be getting $550 per unit. And if you do 3 water saving measures that qualify, we're going to bump that incentive up $25 a unit to $575 per unit. Likewise, if your project's on the deeper end of the savings scale, say it's at 19% energy savings, that's when our calculation of incentives changes and we're more generous with the incentives. So if you're at 19% site energy savings and you do a water measure, a set of water measures for your project, we're going to bump that incentive up to the next tier. So it'll be, instead of $675 per unit, it will be $750 per unit. So do we have any questions on that, these water performance incentives?
Yes, Matt, we have 2 questions, or 3, I should say. One is, can you, excuse me, can you share the quantifiable savings calculators for those water measures?
Yeah, we can. So right now there's a PG&E work paper that we're basing the savings on, and I can make that available. We are also developing a more friendly calculator where you will be able to simply enter in the products that you're installing or changing, and you'll get the savings, but that's not ready yet. So we'll have a friendly, not easy to use calculator, but I can make that work paper available. And I also just want to let everyone know that after this webinar, we'll make this webinar available, but we'll also send out a summary of what we talked about, and any kind of questions that came up, we'll will address in that summary email that you'll get probably early next week, and I'll make sure that work paper's in there.
Another question is, would water savings and incentives for shower heads be in addition to energy savings attributable to water heating?
Yeah, good question. And yes, they're additive. So the savings that you get from saving hot water energy is in addition to these embedded energy savings. You can take credit for both.
And then we have a lot of questions are coming in. If more than 3 water measures are implemented, are additional percentage bonuses available?
Yes. Yeah, we'll figure that out on a case-by-case basis. I'm working with another one of my colleagues is leading the water effort, and so we're still determining how that will work, but we've thought of it. So yes, we will be able to do that.
And then for the water measures, is there a minimum baseline fixture type, such as 2.5 GPM shower heads, and how big of a sample size do we need?
A very good question. So in terms of sample size, I would ask you to follow the sampling requirements for other energy savings measures in MUP, and that's in the partner handbook. And we will have minimum quantities. We have them now for shower heads, aerators, and I think most people know those. They're based on the existing hot water work paper. For toilets, I don't know that one off the top of my head, but we have it. It exists. And for the other measures, let's work together on that. So again, if you have a project that wants to claim these savings, tell us what your baseline is, and we'll work with you to take credit for upgrades.
And then we have one person with her hand raised. Thank you for waiting, Melinda. You should be unmuted. Melinda, do you have a question?
And Melinda, you might be muted on your end too, possibly.
Sorry, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Good morning. I did type it in. I wanted to go back to the rater incentives and the request for having folks go out at 50%. I'm unclear on that. So for example, if they're installing windows, are you asking that the raters are there when half the windows are installed?
Yeah, so I think this is something we'd work out on a case-by-case basis. So if you're taking credit for half of the windows, and at stage
you would
one,
want to take credit for all the windows. So I'm not clear on where the 50%. We need to add an extra site visit. I'm not clear on that.
Right. Okay. So imagine we have a project that is doing windows in stage 1 and boilers in stage 2. We would want the windows to be inspected and signed off on for stage 1 incentives. We won't worry about the boilers until stage 2, and then you would go and inspect those. In another situation, I can imagine where we might have half the windows installed in stage 1, and then the second half of the windows are installed in stage 2. I think there we have potentially a little more flexibility, where as long as we could get some photo documentation of the windows that have been installed so far, we would then at stage 2, when we're paying the final incentive on the windows, fully document those. So we would need, all the invoices and things like that, permit sign off.
So basically, you're just saying that this is required when it's broken up in phases. If they're replacing all the all the windows on a Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, we don't need to stand there on Wednesday morning.
Oh, no.
Got it.
Yeah, you don't have to go there. Yeah. So it's just whatever you're taking credit for, energy savings wise. If it's a broken out project, we want to make sure that what we're taking credit for, we have documentation on.
Absolutely. Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Matt, we have another question, and this is back to the water savings. Will you have to already meet the 10% minimum before taking credit for having the additional credit for water savings, or can you incorporate the water savings to meet the 10%?
We need projects to meet 10% site energy savings, so you have to meet 10% before the water measures are taken into account. That's a good clarification there.
Okay, I think that's it for questions right now.
We announced during the partner orientation that we're moving to the non-residential performance version of EnergyPro for all projects, low-rise and high-rise. And this is in response to a request from the CPUC. They feel that modeling in the non-res performance module is more accurate. And we've been looking at this and converting a number of projects, and we're finding a couple things. So one, we recognize that predicting incentives and selling projects is difficult if you don't know, if your models aren't converted already. So if they're not in non-res from the get-go, you know, it's hard to predict what your incentive is going to be like when we transition. Also, so far with the work that we've done converting models, we found that the results there's still some questions about how everything's going to work. So this year, we're making a change. So we had a March 31st deadline to submit models in res performance, and we would convert them for you. We're taking that away. And so this year, in 2018, it's totally fine to submit projects in the res performance module. We'll do the conversion on our end, and it won't impact the incentive. Essentially, we'll adjust the savings that we are reporting to PG&E, but your incentive isn't going to be impacted. So that's a big change, and should make it easier. But there's still, I think there are two things I want to let everyone know about. One is that this change is coming, so we're still going to be moving to the non-residential performance module eventually. And there are some distinct advantages in using non-res, even for low-rise projects. And one that I can think of right away is that you have more, you can model lighting energy savings more accurately in the non-res module. So you can do a nice calculation of existing wattages and your proposed wattages and get really detailed information on the energy savings and really take advantage of the great performance of LEDs. I think you know that modeling in res performance, you have really limited options. You only get to tick off that checkbox for high efficacy, but we know that good LEDs are far exceeding those high efficacy wattage requirements. So, submit your project any way you want. You can submit in res or you can submit in non-res. We'll do the conversions. We'll take care of all of that. But consider the non-res version if it makes sense for what you're doing. I also want to announce that we're going to have a training, so how to convert res models to non-res. We'll be announcing it soon, so you'll get emails out. But we're aiming for March 15th. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the date, and you'll just learn, key things about the non-res performance module. Okay. Another pause for questions.
I haven't seen, oh, Linda.
Oh.
All right. Oh, Linda, you should be unmuted.
Thanks. So I'm wondering, how in the past we've had the incentive calculator. Would there be then available 2 incentive calculators, one for if you were modeling using the residential, and then one if you were using the non-residential?
No, there wouldn't. The incentive calculator is going to work the same either way. So it has the same input. So you'll just be putting in the kWh inputs, therms inputs, kW inputs, and it'll spit out the results. But I think I see where you're going. Are you saying, Linda, that if there is some underlying difference in the way those 2 things are treated, would we have different incentive structures? Is that your question?
Well, I was just more thinking about I guess it wouldn't be logical that the results in terms of kW saved or therm saved would be different. So maybe that was just a non-understanding question where I went, oh, wait a minute. No, I get it now. So yeah, there wouldn't be a difference.
The input should be the same, so you should be able to use the incentive calculator in the same way.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And then we have a question from Ben. Ben, I can unmute you too. Ben, you are unmuted.
I don't have my microphone hooked up.
Oh, okay. Well, I can hear you, but I will put you back on.
I guess I do have a microphone hooked up. I just wondered, are you still requiring EnergyPro version 7 for both res and non-res? And if so, will you convert from older versions?
Okay, good question. And we'll take models in either version of EnergyPro, so version 5 or version 7. You can submit either one.
Thanks.
Yep. And I also noticed a long question from Ryan. And I'm going to unmute you, Ryan, because I think it'll be easier. So Ryan, you're unmuted. Would you like to ask your question? Okay, so I put you back on mute, Ryan. Question is, oh, this is more of a comment that essentially says that this is a good idea and that you can really take credit and capture savings from lighting by using the non-res version. I think I captured that right. Okay.
Yeah, just want to clarify that his comment's referring to the transition to non-res from res.
Okay.
That's the good idea. And then also for the 2 calculators, or not, back to Linda's question, yeah, the calculator will work the same. We're just taking the savings outputs from whichever module you're using, residential or non-res, and inputting it into the same calculator.
Okay. Cool. What else do we have? Looks like Molly might have a question.
And Linda.
Molly, I'm going to unmute you. Hey, Molly.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I did have a question, but it was already answered earlier. It was in regards to the water savings.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Who's next? We'll go. I'm just going up the list alphabetically from what I can tell. So I'm Melinda, you are up next, I think. So Melinda, are you there and unmuted? Oh, you know what? Let's see. Hey, Melinda, are you there? I see. I think I've been reading this thing wrong, and I've been grabbing people with question marks instead of hands. So I think the last one that we might have is from Linda. And Siobhan, do you see a question from Linda?
Let me check. No.
Okay, cool. So I think we got everyone. Sorry about the confusion there, but I'm going to move on and we'll have a little time at the end for anything I missed. So TRC is offering multifamily owner services on behalf of PG&E, and this, we've talked about this before, but this is a service where we're helping owners find all the different program offerings in PG&E territory. So focusing mostly on PG&E programs, but also, you know, if there are other non-PG&E programs available, we're keeping track of those and referring projects to them if it's a good fit. And I just wanted to talk about one of them today that you'll see here and there. It's called the Energy Savings Assistance Program. And this is for residents. It's focused on residents as opposed to property owners or building owners. And residents can get free energy efficient equipment. So these are things like light bulbs, you know, basic items that usually reside in units, not exclusively, but often. To be eligible, a given resident has to have an income less than 200% of the federal poverty line, and for a property to be eligible, 80% of its residents have to meet that eligibility, that income guideline. So those are the really basic eligibility requirements. And I wanted to let everyone know out there that, you know, if we're talking to a project and it looks like they're serving a low-income population or they have subsidized housing, we'll let them know that this program exists. So if you bring us a project, just know that we'll talk about this during the pre-qualification call if we haven't talked to them already. Also know that a project can enroll in both the multifamily upgrade program and the energy savings assistance program, and they really probably go pretty well hand in hand. So, you know, MUP is focused on more holistic whole building style retrofits, whereas ESA is kind of getting inside the units and looking at a lot of equipment that the resident might own themselves. Kind of a bonus, the ESA measures can count towards the 10% site savings if your project is dipping in under the threshold. and we'll work with you and the ESA team to figure out how to quantify that and make sure that we capture everything. But if that is the case, so if the ESA measures are making 3% of the savings and the MUP measures are making 7%, we're going to adjust that incentive. We'll adjust the incentive appropriately. And Siobhan, anything you wanted to add about ESA?
Yeah, if you have any questions, we're always here to answer them. And whether it's for ESA or any other multifamily program through our multifamily owner services work that we're doing for PG&E, you can use, if you are speccing a project and see other opportunities or wondering if there are other programs available in addition to MUP, just feel free to give us a call or send us an email, and we'll set up a call with either ourselves or Genevieve Resnick, who is our point person for these other programs. And then the other thing is for ESA in particular, when it is at that 10% of that cusp, and like Matt said, it drops to say 7%. No, it's not. We won't drop it from the program. We're working to help leverage the two so that these low-income properties can still accomplish the work that they want to get done.
Great, thanks. And that pretty much wraps it up. We have about 10 minutes left for any other questions or comments, feedback that you all might have. And I'm not seeing anything, but we can pause for a moment. All right, so yeah, I just want to let everyone know that we recorded this. It's going to be available. Look for an email for that upcoming training on NonRes performance, so you can leverage that platform for future projects or existing projects. And we will also summarize the key points of this webinar. We'll make the slides available, and we'll send you a summary email. When we do send you an email, it's going to have a little survey, a short survey. It'll ask you for your feedback on this call, but also for some general kind of questions about how the program's working for you. And one last check. I think that's it. So thank you everybody for attending, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us.